All right, thank you so much for being here with us today at 13 on your side. We've got Tudor Dixon here running for governor in the upcoming election here in Michigan. We're going to get right into it, ask you a few questions today.
Okay.
So what was the first moment or catalyst that made you decide to launch your campaign for governor?
Really, we've been watching what was happening across the country. Obviously, a new administration coming into office and COVID going on nationally, and we looked at Michigan and said things were handled differently in Michigan. Businesses were coming to me and saying that they felt that they were struggling to actually move forward. They were struggling before this, though, before COVID. And I'm a mom of 4 daughters, so I'm watching what's happening with kids in school and started to talk to folks and say, who's going to run against Gretchen Whitmer? And there didn't seem to be that typical politician, so we said, if we can build the right team, this is the time to do this, and turns out we were able to do that.
Wonderful. All right, let's get into some questions about the economy. Two of the biggest challenges affecting people here in Michigan right now are gas prices, we're all feeling that, and inflation. How would you go about combating the economic strain that these factors are putting on Michiganders?
I think first and foremost, we have to push back on the federal government. This inflation is coming from the federal government, and our gas prices are high because we are no longer energy independent. But let's look at what we can do within the state as well, because we have a governor right now that is pushing to close down Line 5. So her energy policy is in line with the Biden administration's energy policy, which is very detrimental for the state. It's key that we make sure that Line 5 is secure, that we go forward with building the tunnel, that we make sure that we have that pipeline available to us, and that will help us keep costs low, because if we were to shut down Line 5, that would increase gas prices, and then that increases the cost of moving product throughout the state, which is ultimately what leads to higher prices in the grocery store and our stores.
Wonderful. All right, next question. Do you support tax incentives for businesses to relocate or remain here in Michigan?
We've said that we want to look at all of those contracts right now, and I think there are several different ways to bring businesses into the state. When I've talked to businesses who have decided to leave or have decided to build their factories outside of the state, I've asked them what it was that caused them to move. They've never told me that it was the tax incentives or even energy costs. They've said, we're in a race to start our companies right now, to go up against our competitors. We want to choose a state that's in that race with us. So what does that mean? That means that they have other states coming to them and saying, we're going to streamline the process. So we have a shovel-ready site for you right here. We're going to help you get those permits. We're going to help you get all of your permits and licenses that you need to start your business. And we're gonna get in that race to make sure that you are producing product as quickly as you can. In Michigan, they're saying that they go from a state that tells them 2 to 3 months to Michigan that says 8 to 9, maybe even a year, and so they choose to go outside of the state of Michigan. So I want to focus on how we become friendly, investment friendly, even to our businesses that are already here when they're looking to expand. Some of them are going out of state, but let's keep them here, and let's focus on what we can do right now to make sure that we're walking alongside them and helping them to expand as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so rental and housing prices are adding to an already massive burden on Michiganders. How would you work to reduce those costs?
We're seeing this in many different areas, and there's a lot of local communities that are coming around and trying to ease this burden and help with housing. I think there is the opportunity for the state to get involved, but one of the best ways I think for us to get involved is to make it less expensive to live in the state. And so obviously we talked about Line 5, we talked about energy costs, but also we've already seen that the legislature has reduced the income tax and taken that to the governor a couple of times, and she's vetoed that. I think we need to look at ways to reduce the costs, but also how can we bring more people to the state for tourism and have some of our guests pay the cost so that people can afford housing.
It's like you read my mind. My next question is, so tourism employs over 200,000 Michiganders. We know that's a big thing here in our state, and it's a source of over $30 billion in revenue. How would you maintain and improve the tourism industry and attract more visitors to our state?
We have the Pure Michigan campaign, which I think is very important. But how do we rebuild our tourism industry after what happened with COVID? Because our tourism industry was hit harder than any other state. Our governor had restaurants and hotels shut down longer than any other state. So not only do we have to look at how can we boost it up, but how do we rebuild it? We lost 3,000 restaurants. We still have hotels that are telling me they don't have the employees, they can't book full time. So we have to come around those industries and make sure that people are able to start up restaurants if they want to. That's the #1 place that people become entrepreneurs. And right now we're seeing in this state it's really difficult. So I spoke to a restaurant owner in the Detroit area, and he said, for me, I can start up a restaurant outside of Detroit much easier than inside of Detroit. Well, think about that. In some of our communities that really need to be built up from within, it's challenging for them to get through that permitting process, to get through all the licenses. They have to hire someone to help them. So how can we as a state come together and say, we're going to make it easier to have some of these restaurants and hotels that support our tourism industry at the same time advertising what a beautiful state Michigan is?
Wonderful. So a little bit of an easier question for you. Where is your favorite Michigan destination, vacation destination?
Oh, wow.
I know, I put you on the spot there.
I know. It's hard to say that it's not my hometown, because a staycation is like the best way to just relax, and we have Pure Marquette, and it's just an amazing place to go. I love escaping on a weekend and taking the girls down there and just exploring everything. But we're also skiers, so we are in the winter time. You'll find us at Crystal Mountain, and that's the best place for my girls, I think, to ski. We just love it.
Yes, the water winter wonderland. Which
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
Yes.
That's why I always say people should come to the state. We have everything. We have it
Yes.
all.
We're a little biased, but yes.
Right, exactly.
All right, a couple questions now about environmentalism and energy. So polls in Michigan show that it is almost split on whether or not people believe that humans are causing climate change. What do you believe, and do you support alternative energy solutions like wind, solar, and nuclear energy?
I'm always supportive of innovation and ideas to make sure that we are having the least possible impact. And I think that that's something that we've done as a manufacturer. I've experienced that myself. I always talk about the fact that in the steel industry, we made steel castings the same way for many years, and the latest factory that my family has been involved with has changed from having a chemically bonded sand to having a vacuum sealed sand. Those are just the ways that we see innovation and how we can affect the environment in different ways. I think that any type of innovation is great. We should always be focused on that. We can't focus on that to the point of straining our electric grid, or our electrical grid right now. So we have to make sure that we have the energy that we need while also looking at alternatives and bringing in innovation.
Wonderful. We'll talk a little bit about education now. I know you said you have daughters, so younger daughters. So many have alluded to flaws within Michigan's public education system and indicated they would prioritize things differently. How do they plan on doing so?
Well, so I think we have to be honest about where we are in education, and a lot of people in Michigan aren't aware that we're 38th in the nation. We just had our literacy exams come back, and third graders failed at a 50% rate across the state. So that's pretty detrimental when you look at it. We don't want the system to fail the children. We want there to be no wrong path for students. So when we look at this, we have to say, we can just continue to put money into it and hope that it changes, or we can say, in any other business, we would say, what's the root cause of this, and how can we have a corrective action for that? And also, how can we get parents involved, because ultimately their child is the user of the public school. We want them to make sure that they're involved and they have the input as to where their child should be. So we're talking about funding the students instead of funding the system. And I know there is a concern that if you fund the student, that could affect the public school system. So I want to make it clear that we've never seen that happen. We look at the state of Florida that has done a great job of funding students, and they were in a similar situation to us. They were in the bottom 10 in the nation. Now they're in the top 10 with a thriving public school education and also a thriving private system. Because I really think it's important to understand that the parent is the one who understands what the child needs best. I mean, I talk to parents who say, well, I have 2 kids in my local public school, but one of my kids struggled in this area or this area. Maybe they had a reading issue, and we thought that the teachers in this school were able to connect to them on a different level. And I think that needs to be the way we look at education. It needs to be how parents see their child learning best. And ultimately, that will cause all of our education systems to rise and thrive to that occasion. But when we look at our public schools now, we should say, gosh, why do we have so many kids that are being failed in the education system, and how do we combat that, and what programs can we do to come around our public schools? And that's why we have our tutoring program. We've talked about that several times across the state. we have a once-in-a-generation crisis in education. Our kids have never been out of school for as long as they have been. So what can we do to support education across all spectrums? And we really believe that we can take some of those COVID dollars and put them toward 25 hours of tutoring. Again, mom and dad can come in and say, this is where we think our child needs help the most, and we'd love to see the state help fund getting them back on track.
Wonderful. Every time you said tutor, I wanted to say no pun intended, right?
Somebody said to me, your slogan should be Michigan needs a tutor.
I mean, so my next question, do you support the teaching of diversity, equity, and inclusion in public schools here in Michigan?
You know, I really want to focus on getting our kids back on track on the basics. So if we look at public education, any education, from kindergarten to 3rd grade, our kids are learning to read. And then from 3rd grade on, they're reading to learn. But like I said, we just had a 50% failure rate on our 3rd graders, so we're missing the boat there. I'd like to put the focus on getting back to those facts and reading, and reading, writing, and arithmetic. Make sure we get those under control. And I'd love to see that money go toward hardening our schools. So we have these programs in the schools right now with DEI directors, but let's get a safety resource director in there. We know that we have an issue where we have our schools that are vulnerable, and I want to make sure that our kids are not going to a place where they are vulnerable during the day.
Let's talk a little bit about election security. Many list election integrity as a policy priority, and several of our viewers wanted to know, where do you stand with regard to the idea that widespread fraud occurred during the 2020 election?
Oh yeah, I think that we had a situation that is unique to any year, any election year we've ever had. Let's take a look back at 2020, where all of a sudden we are in a situation where we don't know if people can go to the polls, but it seems as though there was in Michigan a case where the Secretary of State definitely took advantage of that by sending out absentee ballot applications to everyone in the state. And then in addition to that, when she was campaigning, she said she thought the signature match was the most important thing to make sure our elections were secure. She didn't want voter ID, but then she reduced the signature match. On top of that, we had money come in from Mark Zuckerberg, and we were the only state that didn't have government oversight of that money. A lot of things happened in this election that make us very uncomfortable about how it was run. A judge deemed 2 of those things that she did illegal. She cannot do that again. She was supposed to clean the voter rolls up. That didn't happen either. So why would that happen if you weren't trying to alter the results of an election? We have to make sure that we have a robust election system, that our common sense voting laws that the legislature passed already do pass, and we make sure we have voter ID, that we don't have Zuckerbucks coming into the state, that we make sure that we have the voter rolls cleaned up, and these are just common sense. Like I said, these are things that we've seen in other states. Other states have done it, and ultimately both Democrats and Republicans should want to walk away from an election and say we felt good about that.
We're going to move right along, talking about policing now. So police departments across the state of Michigan are seeing a decline in recruiting. You know, we hear a lot about that. More and more officers retiring or leaving the profession or not joining altogether. Our 2 largest cities, Detroit and Grand Rapids, have had an especially hard time with this, the recruiting and shortages. What would you do to help refill the ranks of our police departments? Yeah,
it's one of my #1 concerns. And if you hear me out on the campaign trail, you'll hear me talk about safe cities all the time. First and foremost, we need to support law enforcement. Always, rule of law is what keeps us safe, and it's what keeps our city safe. We know that we need to bring more people to the state of Michigan, and right now we're getting a bad rap for dangerous cities, and we can trace that directly back to the defund the police movement, which this governor, Gretchen Whitmer, came out and said she supports defund the police. That has caused police officers to leave our state. So I say we fund the police, we make sure they have the funding and the training that they need, and we do what we can to get creative about bringing police here. What kinds of ideas can we put out that will fund them in different ways, that will give them more security later in life? We have been sitting down with police across the state and saying, what do you need? Because we want to be the governor that is putting police first. We will always support our law enforcement officers and make sure that public safety is #1. I come from a steel factory, and we started every meeting with a safety meeting. Safety was always #1 my entire life. It should be the same for the state of Michigan.
And that's actually a really good, segue into my next question for you. Obviously the security and well-being of students here in Michigan, younger, older, college, whatever level, really on people's minds these days, with the tragedy in Uvalde, in Texas, the Oxford shooting that happened just recently here in Michigan. How can you help parents and students feel safe in the classroom and help prevent tragedies such as those?
Well, we have a Safe Schools plan from 2018 that our state troopers, that our state police presented. We would like to work with them. We've also been endorsed by the Police Officers Association of Michigan and talked to them at great length about what it takes to make sure our schools are safe. And as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that we can take some of that funding from our DEI sections of the school, those directors of the schools, and put that towards safety resource officers. But also let's take some of those COVID dollars and make sure we're using those wisely to make sure that our kids are safe. We have men and women in the state who are trained in safety. They've created a Safe Schools plan. That includes hardening the schools, but that also includes mental health and taking care of our students' mental health and having okay to say and talking about when we think that there's a threat, making sure that that is fully investigated and making sure that if that person is a threat, that they are getting the help that they need. So I think there are multiple ways to go about it, and definitely we want to engage the folks that know the most about safety in the state.
Wonderful. A follow-up to that as well, how would you work to ensure that mental health services are available to children in Michigan and that historically marginalized communities have access to proper mental health care?
Yeah, we just came from someone who said, I have kids that are in hospitals that are not specialty mental health hospitals, something we have to really get serious about. And we have to work within the constraints of our budgetary system. So we have to make sure that that is a priority along with policing, because the two do go together. When you think about if we have a mental health issue that's not taken care of, that generally leads to something that we end up having to have the police come in for. So how can we go ahead of that? Okay to say is one of those ways, but then we also have to have the hospitals and the professionals available. And that's partially something that we'll have to look at. How do we bring those professionals into the state along with healthcare professionals? Because we lost a lot of those people during the pandemic, so we need to get creative about bringing those folks back to the state as well.
So I know we have to wrap up in just a couple minutes, so I just have two more questions for you. What are some issues that you see a chance to work across the aisle if you are elected as governor?
I think public safety is one of those. I think we can all agree that rule of law is really important. Now we've seen some of these cities that have been destroyed by riots and certainly having trouble rebuilding. We don't want that to happen to any community in the state of Michigan. So I think that's something that is really a strong opportunity to sit down with the folks across the aisle and say, how do we support our law enforcement officers and make sure they are the safest on the streets and that our streets are the safest in the nation?
Wonderful. My last question for you today. So after winning the primary, you'll then need to convince undecided voters and possibly even some Democrats to vote for you in the general election. Governor Whitmer will have to do the same, convincing undecided voters and Republicans to vote for her. For you, how do you plan on winning their votes come November?
I think it's our family-friendly plan will win people over. When we talk about making sure that there's no wrong path for a child in education, making sure that parents are involved, making sure that we have safe cities, and also that government is not interfering with business but coming alongside business as a partner. We need to bring 1 million people back to the state, and I think that our independents and our Democrats are aware of that as they see the population declining. So talking to them about a plan that not only helps them but will draw more people here so that we can increase that tax base and we can lower costs for every Michigander as long as we have more people here. I think that's the way to reach across the aisle, and I believe that we'll be able to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tudor. We appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.